Chapter-2 of The Blonde Lady. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Lenny. The Blonde Lady by Maurice Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 2. The Blue Diamond. In the evening of the 27th of March, old General Baron d'Hautrec, who had been French ambassador in Berlin under the Second Empire, was sleeping comfortably in an easy chair in the house which his brother had left him 6 months before, at 134 Avenue Henri Martin. His lady companion continued to read aloud to him, while Sir Auguste warmed the bed and prepared the nightlight. As an exceptional case, the sister was returning to her convent that evening to spend the night with the Mother Superior, and, at 11 o'clock, she said, "I'm finished now, Mademoiselle Antoinette, and I'm going." "Very well, sister." "And don't forget that the cook is sleeping out tonight, and that you are alone in the house with the manservant." "You need have no fear for Monsieur le Baron. I shall sleep in the next room, as arranged, and leave the door open." The nun went away. A minute later, Charles, the manservant, came in for his orders. The Baron had woke up. He replied himself. "Just the same as usual, Charles. Try the electric bell to see if it rings in your bedroom properly, and, if you hear it during the night, run down at once and go straight to the doctor." "Are you still anxious, General?" "I don't feel well. I don't feel at all well." "Come, Mademoiselle Antoinette, where were we in your book?" "Aren't you going to bed, Monsieur le Baron?" "No, no, I don't care to go to bed till very late. Besides, I can do without help." 20 minutes later, the old man dozed off again, and Antoinette moved away on tiptoe. At that moment, Charles was carefully closing the shutters on the ground floor, as usual. In the kitchen, he pushed the bolt of the door that led to the garden, and, in the front hall, he not only locked the double door, but put up the chain fastening the 2 leaves. Then he went up to his attic on the 3rd floor, got into bed, and fell asleep. Perhaps an hour had elapsed, when, suddenly, he jumped out of bed. The bell was ringing. It went on for quite a long time, 7 or 8 seconds perhaps, and in a steady, uninterrupted way. "That's all right," said Charles, recovering his wits. "Some fresh whim of the Baron's, I suppose." He huddled on his clothes, ran down the stairs, stopped before the door and, from habit, knocked. No answer. He entered the room. "Hullo?" he muttered. "No light. What on earth have they put the light out for?" And he called in a whisper, "Mademoiselle!" No reply. "Are you there, Mademoiselle? What's the matter? Is Monsieur le Baron ill?" The same silence continued around him, a heavy silence that ended by impressing him. He took 2 steps forward. His foot knocked against a chair, and, on touching it, he perceived that it was overturned. And thereupon his hand came upon other objects on the floor, a small table, a fire-screen. Greatly alarmed, he went back to the wall and felt for the electric switch. He found it and turned on the light. In the middle of the room, between the table and the looking-glass wardrobe, lay the body of his master, the Baron d'Hautrec. "What?" he stammered. "Is it possible?" He did not know what to do, and, without moving, with his eyes starting from his head, he stood gazing at the general disorder of the room, the chairs upset, a great crystal candlestick smashed into 1,000 pieces, the clock lying on the marble hearthstone, all signs of a fierce and hideous struggle. The handle of a little steel dagger gleamed near the body. The blade was dripping with blood. A handkerchief stained with red marks hung down from the mattress. Charles gave a yell of horror. The body had suddenly stretched itself in one last effort, and then shrunk up again. 2 or 3 convulsions, and that was all. He stooped forward. Blood was trickling from a tiny wound in the neck and spotting the carpet with dark stains. The face still wore an expression of mad terror. "They've killed him," he stammered. "They've killed him!" And he shuddered at the thought of another probable crime. Was not the companion sleeping in the next room? And would not the Baron's murderer have killed her too? He pushed open the door. The room was empty. He concluded that either Antoinette had been carried off or that she had gone before the crime. He returned to the Baron's room, and, his eyes falling upon the writing desk, he observed that it had not been broken open. More remarkable still, he saw a handful of louis d'or on the table, beside the bunch of keys and the pocket-book which the Baron placed there every evening. Charles took up the pocket-book and went through it. One of the compartments contained banknotes. He counted them. There were 13 notes of 100 francs each. Then the temptation became too strong for him. Instinctively, mechanically, while his thoughts did not even take part in the movement of his hand, he took the 13 notes, hid them in his jacket, rushed down the stairs, drew the bolt, unhooked the chain, closed the door after him, and fled through the garden. Charles was an honest man at heart. He had no sooner pushed back the gate than, under the influence of the fresh air, with his face cooled by the rain, he stopped. The deed of which he had been guilty appeared to him in its true light, and struck him with sudden horror. A cab passed. He hailed the driver. "Hi, mate! Go to the police station and bring back the commissary. Gallop! There's murder been done." The driver whipped up his horse. But when Charles tried to go in again, he could not. He had closed the gate himself, and the gate could not be opened from the outside. On the other hand, it was of no use ringing, for there was no one in the house. He therefore walked up and down along the gardens which, at the La Muette end, lined the avenue with a pleasant border of trim green shrubs. And it was not until he had waited for nearly an hour that he was at last able to tell the commissary the details of the crime and hand him the 13 banknotes. During this time a locksmith was sent for, who, with great difficulty, succeeded in forcing the gate of the garden and the front door. The commissary went upstairs and, at once, at the first glance, said to the servant, "Why, you told me that the room was in the greatest disorder." He turned round. Charles seemed pinned to the threshold, hypnotized. All the furniture had resumed its usual place. The little table was standing between the two windows, the chairs were on their legs, and the clock in the middle of the mantelpiece. The shivers of the smashed candlestick had disappeared. Gaping with stupor, he articulated, "The body, Monsieur le Baron." "Yes," cried the commissary, "where is the victim?" He walked up to the bed. Under a large sheet, which he drew aside, lay General Baron d'Hautrec, late French ambassador in Berlin. His body was covered with his general's cloak, decorated with the cross of the Legion of Honor. The face was calm. The eyes were closed. The servant stammered, "Someone must have come." "Which way?" "I can't say, but someone has been here during my absence. Look, there was a very thin steel dagger there, on the floor, and then, on the table, a blood-stained handkerchief. That's all gone. They've taken away everything. They've arranged everything." "But who?" "The murderer. We found all the doors closed. He must have remained in the house. Then he would be here still, as you never left the pavement." The man reflected and said slowly, "That's so. That's so. And I did not go far from the gate either. Still. Let us see. Who was the last person you saw with the Baron?" "Mademoiselle Antoinette, the companion." "What has become of her?" "I should say that, as her bed was not even touched, she must have taken advantage of Sir Auguste's absence to go out also. It would only have surprised me if she had. She's young and pretty." "But how could she have got out?" "Through the door." "You pushed the bolt and fastened the chain. A good deal later. By that time she must have left the house." "And the crime was committed, you think, after she went?" "Of course." They searched the house from top to bottom, from the garrets to the cellars, but the murderer had fled. How? When? Was it he or an accomplice who had thought proper to return to the scene of the crime and do away with anything that might have betrayed him? Those were the questions that suggested themselves to the police. The divisional surgeon came upon the scene at 7 o'clock, the head of the detective service at 8. Next came the turn of the public prosecutor and the examining magistrate. In addition, the house was filled with policemen, inspectors, journalists, Baron d'Hautrec's nephew, and other members of the family. They rummaged about. They studied the position of the body, according to Charles's recollection. They questioned Sœur Auguste the moment she arrived. They discovered nothing. At most, Sœur Auguste was surprised at the disappearance of Antoinette Préat. She had engaged the girl 12 days before, on the strength of excellent references, and refused to believe that she could have abandoned the sick man confided to her care to go running about at night alone. All the more so, the examining magistrate insisted, as in that case she would have been in before now. We therefore come back to the same point. What has become of her? If you ask me, said Charles, she has been carried off by the murderer. The suggestion was plausible enough and fitted in with certain details. The head of the detective service said, "Carried off? Upon my word, it's quite likely." "It's not only unlikely," said a voice, "but absolutely opposed to the facts, to the results of the investigation, in short, to the evidence itself." The voice was harsh, the accent gruff, and no one was surprised to recognize Ganimard. He alone, besides, would be forgiven that rather free and easy way of expressing himself. "Hello, is that you, Ganimard?" cried Monsieur Dudouis. "I hadn't seen you." "I have been here for 2 hours." "So you do take an interest in something besides number 514, series 23, the Rue Clépeyron mystery, the blonde lady, and Arsène Lupin?" "Hey, grinned the old inspector. "I won't go so far as to declare that Lupin has nothing to do with the case we're engaged on. But let us dismiss the story of the lottery ticket from our minds until further orders, and look into this matter." Ganimard is not one of those mighty detectives whose proceedings form a school, as it were, and whose names will always remain inscribed on the judicial annals of Europe. He lacks the flashes of genius that illumine a Dupin, a Lecoq, or a Holmlock Shears. But he possesses first-rate average qualities: perspicacity, sagacity, perseverance, and even a certain amount of intuition. His greatest merit lies in the fact that he is absolutely independent of outside influences. Short of a kind of fascination which Arsène Lupin wields over him, he works without allowing himself to be biased or disturbed. At any rate, the part which he played that morning did not lack brilliancy, and his assistance was of the sort which a magistrate is able to appreciate. "To start with," he began, "I will ask Charles here to be very definite on one point. Were all the objects which, on the first occasion, he saw upset or disturbed, put back, on the second, exactly in their usual places?" "Exactly." "It is obvious, therefore, that they can only have been put back by a person to whom the place of each of those objects was familiar." The remark impressed the bystanders. Ganimard resumed. "Another question, Mr. Charles. You were woke by a ring. Who was it, according to you, that called you?" "Monsieur le Baron, of course." "Very well. But at what moment do you take it that he rang?" "After the struggle, at the moment of dying." "Impossible, because you found him lying, lifeless, at a spot more than 4 yards removed from the bell-push." "Then he rang during the struggle." "Impossible, because the bell, you told us, rang steadily, without interruption, and went on for 7 or 8 seconds. Do you think that his assailant would have given him time to ring like that?" "Then it was before, at the moment when he was attacked." "Impossible! You told us that, between the ring of the bell and the instant when you entered the room, 3 minutes elapsed, at most. If, therefore, the baron had rung before, it would be necessary for the struggle, the murder, the dying agony, and the flight to have taken place within that short space of 3 minutes. I repeat, it is impossible." "And yet," said the examining magistrate, "someone rang. If it was not the baron, who was it?" "The murderer." "With what object?" "I can't tell his object. But at least the fact that he rang proves that he must have known that the bell communicated with the servant's bedroom. Now, Who could have known this detail except a person belonging to the house? The circle of suppositions was becoming narrower. In a few quick, clear, logical sentences, Ganimard placed the question in its true light, and, as the old inspector allowed his thoughts to appear quite plainly, it seemed only natural that the examining magistrate should conclude: "In short, in 2 words, you suspect Antoinette Bréhat." "I don't suspect her, I accuse her." "You accuse her of being the accomplice?" "I accuse her of killing General Baron d'Hautrec." Come, come, and what proof?" "This handful of hair, which I found in the victim's right hand, dug into his flesh by the points of his nails." He showed the hair. It was hair of a brilliant fairness, gleaming like so many threads of gold. And Charles muttered: "That is certainly Mademoiselle Antoinette's hair. There's no mistaking it." And he added: "Besides, there's something more. I believe the knife, the one I didn't see the second time, belonged to her. She used it to cut the pages of the books." The silence that followed was long and painful, as though the crime increased in horror through having